Something shifted inside the Browns' locker room this week, and it didn't come from a coach, a GM, or some analyst trying to go viral. It came from the one player who lines up beside Shedeur Sanders more than anyone else. The guy who sees the pressure, hears the frustration, and feels the weight of every throw right alongside him. Harold Fannin Jr. finally stepped forward, and what he revealed didn't just silence the noise. It exposed how much the outside world has misunderstood the entire situation. For days, social media ran wild with takes about Shedeur's 3-interception performance. Fans argued, reporters speculated, and some voices even suggested the rookie was overwhelmed, confused, or simply not ready. But while everyone on the outside shouted their opinions, the only person who actually shared the field with him for 14 targets. "14 had a completely different story to tell, a story rooted in trust, chemistry, and a level of responsibility most people never see. And then came the twist nobody expected. Fannin didn't just defend Shedeur, he broke down what really happened with the routes, the reads, and even the so-called wristband confusion that the media turned into a full-blown narrative. According to him, things weren't nearly as chaotic as people tried to make them. But that was only the beginning, because the way Fannin spoke, the pauses, the honesty, the subtle pushback at the media's angle, revealed something much bigger brewing behind the scenes. And once you hear what he really meant, the entire conversation around Shedeur changes instantly. From the moment Shedeur Sanders stepped onto an NFL field, there was a different kind of spotlight on him, brighter, heavier. And far less forgiving than what most rookies deal with. It wasn't just because of his last name or the hype surrounding his college career. It was because every snap he took came with a level of expectation that Cleveland wasn't prepared for. And when you pair that with a roster still searching for its identity, you get moments like this past game. Moments where the pressure isn't just on the quarterback, but on every receiver, every lineman, every decision maker on the sideline. That's why Harold Fannin Jr.'s comments hit so hard. They weren't the typical "we'll bounce back" cliches you hear after a tough loss. Instead, he peeled back the curtain just enough to show that the chemistry between him and Shedeur wasn't an accident. 14 targets don't happen unless a quarterback believes you're the one who understands his timing, his pace, and his instincts. That kind of trust is built through hours of reps, missed connections corrected on the practice field, and shared pressure in the pocket when everything collapses. But what people outside the locker room never seem to grasp is how quickly those moments pile up on a young quarterback. Reports claim there's been mounting frustration behind the scenes. Not from Shedeur himself, but from the offense struggling to keep up with the speed and chaos of live games. And when a quarterback feels the play breaking down while trying to rely on receivers still learning the system, you get the kind of split-second decisions that can turn into interceptions. Yet Fannin didn't use any of that as an excuse. Instead, he placed part of the responsibility on himself, acknowledging details he needed to tighten, angles he... When a receiver speaks like that, it tells you everything about the internal standard the offense is trying to build around their young QB. And just when it seemed like the conversation was settling into normal post-game reflection, Fannin addressed the first major misconception circulating online. A hint that the story everyone thought they understood was missing a much bigger piece. As soon as reporters brought up the interceptions, you could feel the room shift. Everyone expected Fannin to point toward miscommunication, bad weather, or the Bears' defensive pressure. Instead, he surprised everyone by calmly breaking down what really happened. And none of it matched the dramatic storyline that had taken over social media. Rather than placing blame on Shedeur, Fannin spoke openly about the routes, the adjustments, And the splits, it's a sign that Cleveland has reached a breaking point with what they've been putting on the field. More importantly, it's a sign that the pressure surrounding Shedeur isn't slowing down anytime soon. The truth is, nobody needed advanced analytics or film breakdowns to see where the real problem was. Week after week, Cleveland's offense looked disconnected, sluggish, and far too dependent on Shedeur creating something out of nothing. And the biggest spotlight fell directly on the wide receivers, a group that was supposed to help him transition smoothly into the NFL, not make his job harder. Instead, what fans saw was a carousel of miscommunication, dropped passes, lazy routes, and chemistry that never seemed to click when Shedeur was under center. Jerry Jeudy became the face of that frustration, a player with all the talent in the world. Yet every time Shedeur threw his way, something felt off. It wasn't just one bad game or a handful of missed opportunities. It became a pattern. Fans online started pointing out that Jeudy could look polished with other quarterbacks, then suddenly forget how to secure even basic catches when Shedeur needed him most. It wasn't malicious, but it was noticeable. And in a league where one mistake can flip a narrative overnight, Jeudy's struggles only made Shedeur's growing pains look worse than they truly were. But it wasn't only the receivers. The entire offensive rhythm felt disjointed. The line had moments where it couldn't hold up long enough for routes to develop. Timing was off, spacing was inconsistent, and defenses quickly realized they could smother Cleveland by attacking the weakest links, the guys who weren't winning their matchups. That meant more pressure on Shedeur, more hits, more confusion, and more situations where he was forced to play hero ball just to keep drives alive. And that's exactly why these late-season signings feel less like an experiment and more like a quiet admission. Cleveland knows the offense hasn't been giving Shedeur a fair chance to grow. They know the supporting cast hasn't played up to expectations. And they know that leaving him out there with the same problems would only create more criticism, more noise, and more pressure on a rookie who's already dealing with one of the toughest transitions in the league. The Browns needed help, and signing new players was their way of saying it without actually saying it. At first glance, bringing in Jamari Thrash and Garrett Dillinger might look like a simple depth move, the kind of late-season adjustment teams make just to keep bodies in the building. But when you take a closer look, these additions reveal something far more intentional. Cleveland didn't just sign any available players. They brought in two guys who fill the exact weaknesses that have been dragging the offense down all year long. Jamari Thrash is the most interesting part of this puzzle. He isn't a flashy veteran or a big-name free agent, but he brings something the Browns desperately lack: separation and raw burst. Reports describe him as one of those receivers who doesn't need perfect timing or flawless chemistry to make an impact. He just needs a sliver of space. And for a young quarterback learning to adjust to NFL speed, a receiver who can create that kind of window is priceless. Thrash may not fix everything overnight, but he gives Shedeur something he hasn't had enough of: a receiver who can win quickly and doesn't disappear when the play breaks down. He didn't dodge questions, but he also didn't feed the narrative that Shedeur was rattled or reckless. Instead, he made something very clear. The Bears made two exceptional plays, and sometimes even the right read gets punished by great defensive instincts. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't panic. It was football. What stood out even more was the way Fannin refused to let the conversation shift into blaming the quarterback. When a reporter implied that relying on him for so many targets made the offense predictable, almost suggesting Shedeur forced the ball, Fannin didn't flinch. He simply pointed out the obvious: the ball goes where the read takes it. If the defense leaves you open, the quarterback throws it. The idea that he should catch fewer passes just to keep the defense guessing was something he wasn't about to entertain. Still, the speculation grew louder across the internet. Some fans whispered that maybe Shedeur was being set up to fail by predictable play calling. Others argued the offense had become too dependent on one receiver. And a few even suggested that the interceptions were proof the young QB was cracking under pressure. But the way Fannin spoke, calmly, confidently, made it clear those theories didn't reflect what happened on the field. If anything, his answers painted a picture of an offense that knows exactly where the problems lie and who is responsible for fixing them. And just when the conversation seemed to settle, the reporters pivoted to the moment everyone online had been obsessing over: the wristband confusion, a moment they tried to turn into a sign of chaos. But what Fannon said next completely flipped the narrative. The wristband moment had been blown so far out of proportion online that by the time reporters brought it up, you could almost tell Fannin was confused about why it had become such a big deal. Clips circulated everywhere, slowed down, zoomed in, overanalyzed, all suggesting that Shedeur looked lost because he supposedly didn't have the right play sheet on his wrist. Fans turned a 3-second glance into a full narrative about chaos in the huddle. Some even claimed the offense didn't know what they were running. But when Fannin addressed it, the entire storyline unraveled in seconds. He didn't hesitate. He didn't try to dodge. He simply said the truth. Shedeur called the play, the offense lined up, and nobody was confused. That was it. No dramatic breakdown, no scrambling, no chaos, and certainly no sign that the quarterback was over. According to Fannin, if you weren't on the field, you were seeing something that wasn't actually happening. What people online didn't realize is that these so-called confusing moments happen every single game across the league. Quarterbacks glance down, confirm the play, or double-check personnel. It's normal. The only difference is that Shedeur is under such a massive microscope that tiny things get treated like disasters. Fannin's straightforward response exposed how desperate some were to turn a routine moment into controversy. And then came the question about the 12 men on the field penalty. Again, the internet had theories: bad communication, bad coaching, or Shedeur not knowing the personnel grouping. But once more, Fannin shut it down instantly. He admitted he was late getting out. The stadium was loud, and that honesty told you everything. The mistake wasn't about confusion or incompetence. It was crowd noise and timing, nothing more. But at the same time, Fannin's answer revealed something deeper. The offense is still young, still growing, still adjusting to the speed, the noise, and the expectations tied to a rookie quarterback trying to lead a struggling franchise. It wasn't a meltdown. It was a growing moment, and that's exactly why what Fannin said next became the most important part of the entire press conference. What really caught people off guard wasn't Fannin's breakdown of the routes or the wristband moment. It was the way he talked about the team's mentality during a season that has tested everyone in the building. Reporters kept circling back to the losses, the pressure, and the frustration swirling around the offense. Almost waiting for someone to slip up and admit that the locker room was cracking. But Fannin didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, he revealed something completely different. The struggles had pulled the team closer. He talked about how every week, even after the hardest losses, the players walk into the facility ready to work. No complaining, no finger pointing, no throwing anyone under the bus. And that matters, because losing streaks expose locker rooms faster than anything. Most teams fracture. Most players start looking out for themselves. But according to Fannin, the adversity actually tightened the bond among the guys lining up beside Shedeur. Then came the question everyone was waiting for. How does a rookie quarterback bounce back after a game like that? And this is, he said, Shedeur will bounce back just fine, because he knows how hard he works and how much time he's put into earning his spot. And that confidence wasn't forced. It wasn't scripted. It sounded like someone who's seen the grind up close. What people forget is that these players watch Shedeur every day, not just on Sundays. They see the hours of film he studies, the extra throws, the corrections, the frustration, and the determination that never fades. So while fans and analysts might jump to conclusions after one bad game, the people who actually rely on him during live snaps aren't worried. They know what he's capable of. But Fannin didn't just speak as a teammate. He spoke as someone whose own performance is directly tied to Shedeur's success. If anyone were going to show frustration, it would be him. The guy catching the most passes, taking the toughest hits, and carrying the heaviest share of the offensive load. Instead, he doubled down on his belief in Shedeur, and that kind of support doesn't appear unless the locker room sees something the outside world keeps missing. What really stirred conversation after the interview was the moment reporters pressed Fannon about the wristband issue. Fans online made it a bigger controversy than it actually was, with rumors suggesting Shedeur might have been rattled or confused during the drive. But Fannin shut that down immediately. He explained that even without the wristband, Shedeur didn't look lost for a second. He still called the play, still got everyone lined up, and still executed the way a poised quarterback should. If anything, it showed the complete opposite of what critics were pushing. That Shedeur actually stays calm when things go sideways. But the questions didn't stop there. Reporters wanted to link the wristband moment to the 12 men on the field penalty, hoping to paint a picture of chaos or miscommunication. Fannin didn't let that narrative breathe either. He admitted the mistake was on him, not on the quarterback, not on the coaches. It was loud. The personnel group changed fast, and he simply reacted a second too late. That kind of accountability is rare, especially in a losing season. But it says a lot about the mentality this group is trying to build. And then came the question that revealed more than anyone expected. What are players even fighting for when the playoffs are gone and nothing but pride is left? A lot of fans assume morale just disappears. But Fannin's answer was surprisingly raw. He talked about playing for his teammates, playing for his name, and trying to put something on tape he can build off next year. That's not the voice of someone going through the motions. That's someone who's hungry, and players like that make rookies better. The reporters tried once more to see if uncertainty at quarterback created tension, but Fannin gave them the clearest answer of the day. Knowing Shedeur is finishing the season as the starter actually helps them. It gives the offense stability. It allows chemistry to grow instead of restarting every week. And most importantly, it gives Shedeur the repetition he needs to level up. What fans overlook is this: quarterbacks don't develop through praise. They develop through patterns, through facing the same situations week after week until their instincts sharpen. And this team, according to Fannin, believes that process is already happening because even with the interceptions, the noise, the pressure, and the confusion from outside voices, the people inside that locker room see someone who's learning faster than he's failing. What became even more interesting after Fannin's comments was the shift in how fans started interpreting Shedeur's season as a whole. Before the interview, the loudest voices online wanted to frame his struggles as evidence that the moment was too big, or that Cleveland made a mistake trusting a rookie in a broken offense. But the more people replayed Fannin's words, the more it became clear that the real story was much bigger than one rough game, one odd wristband moment, or one miscommunication penalty. Inside the building, the tone is completely different. Players see a rookie quarterback who's dealing with pressure that most young QBs never face. They see a guy who came into the NFL under a national microscope, carrying expectations most first-year players won't experience in their entire careers. And yet, even with all of that weight, he shows up every day ready to work, absorb criticism, and lead guys who have been in the league longer than he's been legally allowed to drink. That perspective rarely comes across in post-game debates, but Fannin made it impossible to ignore. there's also a growing sense, even among analysts, that Shedeur isn't struggling because he lacks talent. He's struggling because he's being thrown into an offense still trying to find its identity. The receivers aren't consistent, the line is shaky, and injuries have forced constant adjustments. Under those circumstances, any rookie would look uneven. But what separates the good from the special is how they respond. And if you listen closely to Fannin, you hear someone describing a quarterback who refuses to flinch. The biggest takeaway wasn't about the interceptions. It wasn't even about the chemistry between him and Fannin. It was about how fast Shedeur processes failure. Fannin made it clear that the Bears show him something new and that he'll have an answer next time. That's the kind of growth veterans notice, even when fans don't. It's also why the locker room, despite everything, is still fully behind him. Because at the end of the day, rookies aren't judged on perfection. They're judged on whether they learn fast enough to transform mistakes into weapons. And according to the teammates who see him every single day, that transformation is already underway. He wasn't just trying to protect his quarterback. He was signaling something deeper. This offense is being rebuilt around Shedeur, whether the public is ready for that conversation or not. When a rookie receives 14 targets to a single receiver, that's not an accident. That's trust. That's comfort. And most importantly, that's a quarterback identifying the one guy he believes will be exactly where he should be on every snap. But that kind of trust also exposes the fractures within the rest of the offense. When one player becomes the undeniable safety valve, defenses adjust, and suddenly every weakness on the field gets magnified. Fannin knows it, the coaches know it, and Shedeur definitely knows it. Yet instead of complaining or pointing fingers, that's not the attitude of a receiver blaming the quarterback. That's the attitude of a receiver who believes he's building something long-term with him. Behind the scenes, there are also whispers, unverified but gaining traction, that Cleveland's front office is already looking at adding more weapons this offseason, specifically because they believe Shedeur can be the franchise guy. Reports claim the Browns see him not as a temporary experiment, but as the centerpiece of the next era. And for a franchise that has spent years searching for stability at quarterback, that's a major shift. But if Shedeur is going to grow into that role, the offense around him has to evolve too. That includes cleaner communication, stronger protection, and receivers who understand the urgency of every rep. Fannin's comments about the wristband situation hinted at something fans rarely consider. Sometimes the smallest distraction can ripple into an entire play falling apart. Yet, even in that moment, he said Shedeur didn't look confused. A subtle reminder that the rookie's poise is one of his most underrated traits. The truth is simple. This team isn't doubting Shedeur. They're rallying around him. And as the final stretch of the season arrives, that internal belief might matter more than any outside noise. Because when a locker room decides their quarterback is worth fighting for, everything else starts to shift. If there was one moment that revealed the true mindset inside Cleveland's locker room, it wasn't the passes, the penalties, or even the interceptions. It was the way players described Shedeur after the dust settled. Not shaken, not overwhelmed, not second-guessing himself. Instead, even processes the loss. And in the NFL, that level of self-correction is something veterans respect immediately. But the outside noise has been impossible to ignore. Fans argued all week about whether Shedeur was being forced the ball to Fannin, whether the coaches were using him properly, and whether the offense was too predictable to survive against playoff-caliber defenses. Reports suggest some analysts have been waiting for a performance like this to say, "See, he's not ready." But inside the building, the mood is completely different. players aren't questioning if Shedeur will bounce back. They're discussing how quickly he'll bounce back. And Fannin made that clear without ever raising his voice. He didn't defend Shedeur out of pity. He spoke like a man who sees the work behind the scenes, the hours of film study, the willingness to take blame even when the mistakes didn't start with him. The mindset that says, I'm going to figure this out, not, why is this happening to me? Even the wristband moment, something social media tried to spin into chaos, became proof of how composed Shedeur really is. Most rookies would freeze if their playlist suddenly wasn't where it should be. Instead, Fannon said he never looked confused, never panicked. He simply called the play and moved on. For a young quarterback, that's the type of detail teammates remember long after the game ends. But the real story here isn't the interceptions or the miscues. It's the foundation being built under a foundation where the quarterback and his top receiver are already forming a connection that's deeper than play designs or stat lines. And if Cleveland chooses to keep adding weapons, improving protection, and giving Shedeur the support he deserves, the version of him we see now